Experience Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania in 3D.
Scott Lang, you have a daughter. You're an Avenger. But out here, you're out of your league.
On February 17th.
Kang's a monster. He can shatter existence.
An Avenger.
I don't care what he can do. I'm getting us home.
Must face a conqueror.
You may not want her to watch this.
I'm sorry, Cassie.
Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Experience it in 3D. February 17th. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13.
Hey everyone, just wanted to slip in a quick introductory word to this episode. I have been getting a lot of messages from people requesting more content specifically related to spirituality and spiritual topics. I guess a lot of you have really been responding to the psycho-spiritual analysis of the housewives and our favorite Bravo celebrities, and a number of you have been reaching out saying that you wish there were opportunity for deeper, detailed conversations of some of the topics that get touched on when we talk about the housewives. So on that note, I thought I would unearth what is actually the first episode of Deep Dive with Jamie Stein I ever recorded. I recorded this, it may have been as long as 3 years ago now. It's when I first got my podcasting recording equipment, and it was before I even had a sense of what this podcast would be. And I conducted an interview with a friend and colleague of mine, Michael Lennox, who is an astrologer. He's a professional dream interpreter. He's also a certified therapist. And my intention was to just basically have a very practical, pragmatic conversation about astrology and how it can be used in very real-world, tangible, grounded ways for people's spiritual evolution and healing in this lifetime. And what actually emerged was a pretty, I think, thoughtful and provocative conversation that does really get into much more than just astrology itself, and instead navigates what it means to truly be a spiritual being, having an embodied human life experience on this planet Earth, and how we show up to the day-to-day nitty-gritty details of our lives, navigate what needs to be navigated in our lives, and to do so from a place of deeper spiritual connection, particularly when we're navigating circumstances that feel difficult or uncomfortable and make us just want to throw in the towel. So with all that said, I offer this unaired pilot episode of my podcast to you. Please let me know what you think. And moving forward, if there are any specific topics you want to hear about, if I touch on something in a Housewives episode that you want to know more about, please feel free to message me, ask me specific questions, and I hope you guys get a lot out of this. Hi, and welcome to Deep Dive with Jamie Stein, where we take a deep dive look at all things reality TV, pop culture, and the world at large. I'm an intuitive and an empath, which means I pick up on the thoughts, feelings, and energy percolating in other people and the world around me. I believe there is meaning waiting to be found at every turn if you're willing to see it. So join me as we dismantle everything from trash TV to high spiritual concepts and learn more about ourselves, each other, and how we're all connected. I'm sitting here with Michael Lennox, who is a friend and a colleague and my go-to astrologer. Michael wears several hats. You're an astrologer, you are a dream interpreter, and you are also a psychologist.
Yes.
So I think let's just maybe start by getting a little bit of context on you.
Sure.
Because from my understanding, you did not start out early in life thinking you were going to be an astrologer.
I know, or a spiritual teacher. No, I was spiritually curious at a very, very young age. But no, I wanted to be an actor like, everybody else who came to Los Angeles at some point. That was my original dream.
And so what brought you to astrology? And what about astrology spoke to you?
Well, I think there was something buried within astrology that I was called to that I didn't know about until much, much later, when my entire world began to open up spiritually and energetically, was that I have a kind of somatic, visceral sensitivity in my body. I feel the movement. I'm practically motion sick on planet Earth because I'm just so sensitive to the energetic and the shifting, the changing energies that astrology helps me understand. That it's almost like a tool that I was given because I was also given this wildly sensitive, energetic experience that astrology helps me work with. Of course, I didn't know that at 25 when I was in my first astrological reading, and the woman I worked with made a copy of the chart, and she's talking on and on in this astro language, and I'm looking at the chart and I'm following her. Oh, like, really? I'm understanding what she's saying, watching the glyphs and asking questions and understanding the angles that she's talking about. And that was an eye-opening moment for me of like a recognition that the language of astrology was something that was in me already. And so when I sort of dove into the greater spiritual awakening of my life in my 30s, about 10 years later, as the internet exploded and there was resources to look up things about astrology, as astrology.com started expanding their background astrology 101 section of their site, I was reading it every day and I just tumbled in, and then I became obsessed. But it's definitely what it started, I think, out as being driven to a tool that would help me understand why every day felt so different, even though nothing was changing in my circumstances.
So it sounds like you had it almost sounded like a channeled experience, that first reading.
Absolutely. It was something that I could recognize was built in me, that it wasn't, it's like a platitude, and I hate spiritual platitudes. I really do. They turn me off so much, but it applies. In this case, I was remembering astrology. I wasn't learning it. It was pre-installed.
And as a 25-year-old man, did that scare you or freak you out, or did it just feel...
No, not at all. It was right in alignment with everything that had happened. So even though I went on this path as an actor and then later as an executive in the entertainment industry, on the business side of things, I think I learned transcendental meditation when I was 15. I bought my first deck of tarot cards at maybe 16 or 17. I first had an experience with energy and touch where someone who touched me, whose energy I felt really powerfully in their hands, told me that they felt that I had a similar gift with energy and touch. So by the time I was in my early 20s, the spiritual curiosity was absolutely on fire, but I kept it separate. It was over here that I was in my spiritual quest, and over here I was in my daily life. It took a long time before I learned how to integrate them both, and the spiritual path was the one that was the more organic and true one, and rose up and took my life over.
And so was there a moment where you made a conscious decision to go in one direction rather than the other?
There were 2 or 3 significant decisions, the first of which was really just the choice to go to grad school in my late 30s and to start the psychology education, knowing that it wasn't to become a psychotherapist full-time, and I really, really didn't know ultimately why I was making that choice. But it was the gateway to devoting my life to teaching spiritual principles as a way of life. Started with the need to be more educated about the human condition. So that's why I wanted to be educated as a psychologist. Not to be a therapist, but to really understand everything that was knowable in the scientific approach to psychology, because that part was important to me as well as the mystical.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I find, for me, with my intuitive readings, I love the fact that I'm trained in this body-based
psychology, psychotherapy,
yeah.
That's right.
And I can feel that it just allows me to hold the space.
That's right.
I think in particular, what I most value about it is that it really... it facilitates a lack of spiritual bypass. I feel like I'm so comfortable holding space for the good, the bad, the dark, the ugly, and having no judgment.
That's right.
It's interesting for me to hear you say that you knew on some level you were being led.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't quite know why.
At all.
But it sounds like from your response, you have kind of a similar experience in your work of, now that you are working with people spiritually, the fact that you have this background it allows you just to sort of hold a deeper, more nuanced space.
You just brought up something that I've never thought to articulate it, but it's absolutely, I would articulate it in the direction of like theory and knowing what Melanie Klein said about, the first 6 months of life and where Freud and Jung fits into it. And that's helpful. What you just mentioned, which is really part of that, is as a psychologist, I am trained to be comfortable, or at least willing, to hold space for the darkest of the darkest of the most shadowy, scary, frightening, humiliating experiences that a person is hiding inside of themselves. And so because I have that training and that comfort level with that kind of darkness, there isn't any need to do spiritual bypass because I've got you. I have you if you go to that deep and dark, scary place.
Yeah.
And myself too. I mean, that was, I was my first client. You know what I mean? Like, I benefited the most by learning how to go into those deep, shadowy places and not run away screaming.
Well, so this brings up an interesting point, and I'm aware this is I was going to say this is a little bit of a detour from the astrology, although I'm sure it'll probably circle all back around.
It always does.
Exactly.
Yes.
But, you're speaking to a process of surrender, is what I'm hearing. Like, at this time, you were led to this program and to become a psychologist, even though you didn't know why. I guess I'm curious, is there anything more you want to say about how you received that message that this was the thing to do, not even knowing why and what it was like to surrender to that?
When you ask me that, what it sparks in me is to talk about how we receive information in our daily lives. The dominant, loudest way is through our mind and in the form of thoughts. The thoughts that we are having about our lives. And then if you drop down into a more, and you know this from your specific work, of body-oriented psychotherapy, that the body gives you information. The body tells you if you're safe or not safe in an intelligence and information that's much more immediate but completely irrational. It's like a knowing, a feeling. And that's something you can actually cultivate. You can cultivate that one's own capacity to pay more attention to those knowings, to those feelings, and less attention to the thoughts that you're having or the judgments that you might make about this circumstance. And I don't know how it was as easy as it was, and maybe my memory of it being easy is just completely false, and it was a crisis. All I know is I felt it. And that feeling was not a thought. It was not a rational description of what I was doing. It was a feeling that just felt compelling, and I followed it. Because for years I thought about grad school, but my mind had different ideas. So if I had relied on what I was thinking about whether I should go to grad school or not, I would never have gotten to the point of decision. But by following that instinct, that body-centered information. So how that travels now to here 20 years later when I'm, fully engaged in my practice that's both personal and what I teach people is our minds don't help us make decisions even though we rely on them so much. It's the other intelligence, the sort of the instinct of how does something feel? Do I feel good here? Do I not feel good here? That I think is so lacking in people that I wind up working with who want to know more about how to shut their minds down so that they can listen to their hearts. That's the platitude, is listen to your heart. And there's some accuracy to that platitude.
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably like one of the number one challenges I see in working with people and clients is people basically saying, well, how do I cultivate that? How do I be open to that? Because my mind is so overpowering and strong. And I'm just curious. I mean, when people come to you saying, "How do you have?"
Yeah, I have a go-to answer for that question that is completely appropriate to the idea of being somewhere where somebody asks you how, and you've got to have a quick answer and a quick sort of response to something. Would be, how about just put a hand on your heart, put another hand on your belly, take a deep and profound breath, and just lean into the sensation of that breath going into your body. In that moment, when the person does that, they will have a brief but completely palpable experience of surrender. It can't not happen because that is what the body is designed to do. And it is doing it or attempting to do it with every breath that you take. The mind's opinions about everything that's happening is what distracts you from that occurrence. By taking a moment and putting a hand on your heart and one on your belly and taking a deep breath, even if it's only for 3 seconds, you will have a profound shift of how you are experiencing your embodiment in that moment. The difference between me and someone who is suffering from not being able to do that is that act that took 3 seconds, I've done that act 7,652,000 times, and probably more than that. I'd have to do the math. But that's the thing where people get mixed up. It's not complicated. You don't have to learn some, complex thing to do. You have to do something very simple, but you have to do it thousands and thousands of times a day.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you're saying this, and it gets me so excited because I feel like this is the thing that I love to teach, and it's, ultimately what I want so much of this podcast to be about. It is this thing about the willingness to be in process with life.
Yes.
And, I'm sure with astrology, certainly with me with intuitive readings, all the time, maybe not all the time, I've actually been very blessed and fortunate in terms of the kind of people who come to me sort of willing to be seekers and willing to hold space for the bigger picture. But of course there's that impulse of I'm coming to you because I want to bypass something uncomfortable. I want an answer right now.
Yeah, I want to know, and I want to know when. What I get as an astrologer is, when's this going to pass? I'm uncomfortable. Oh, you're in a cycle. Oh, you're in a Saturn cycle. The next question is always, well, when's it going to be over? It's and my quick answer is when you're dead.
Well, no, exactly. And so what you're speaking to, what I hear you speaking to with the 7 million breaths, it's ultimately there is this, it's the quote unquote bad news, except that it's good news. Right. It's there is just this quote unquote reality of we are in these bodies and we are in these lives, and there is just sort of a step by step consistent willingness to do the small things, the cumulative action, the grounding actions, whatever it is you need to do to kind of cultivate that connection to something deeper and to remember who you are, that I think there's just not a lot of time and attention necessarily paid to that in the rhetoric.
Well, and the discipline that's needed to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it and have that be the lifestyle. Mm-hmm. That you're devoted. It's your mind is always thinking, right? Mm-hmm. And it's mostly thinking of stuff that's unimportant and irrelevant, though it'll masquerade as important and relevant, but ultimately it really isn't helping, right? You might as well be using your mind to tap into higher thought, to tap into prayerful thought, to tap into affirmative thought, right? So it's really just a matter of disciplining something that's already happening, but it's happening in in this sort of crazy, chaotic way and leaning towards your fearful experience of life. It's the only thing we can control is what we're thinking and how we're breathing. And so here's my favorite story about this. I tell the story a lot. I'm on a hike, and it's a spiritual group, right? And so there's this young woman. She's fun to talk with, and she's going on and on about her ex-boyfriend and her forgiveness and why she's having a big challenge with that. And so I asked her kind of a tricky-ish question, I said, if I was flying on the wall in your mind when you did that forgiveness work, what would I have heard or seen? And she went through it. I was like, perfect. She's missing nothing. Oh, but then I realized the question to ask her, and I said, so how many times did you do that? And she stopped for a moment. She was like, well, once. I said, oh, well, you just have to do that 17,652 times, and then you'll feel some forgiveness. Right. She thought it was magic.
Right.
And that if she did the right magical thing, she would have a transformation. And it's not magic, it's discipline. It's changing how you're thinking and changing how you're breathing. And that just requires doing the same simple thing over and over and over again until it becomes a new way of being.
I mean, there's so much to say about this, but the thing that most immediately springs to mind, it's a willingness to hold space for the bigger picture.
Yes.
And, that's what I heard even in your willingness to follow that instinct to become a psychologist. It's you didn't know where, when, or how this was leading you somewhere, but now it was leading you somewhere. And that requires a certain consciousness of there is something beyond this that I can't see, which, just speaking for myself personally, because I'm someone who, I mean, like probably like an Olympian in negative thinking, like in terms of, and any of my friends will tell you this, like, I mean, habitual, addictive, obsessive, negative thinking is my background. And I know one of the first thoughts that I really started to work with, because it is so important, I think, to work with thoughts that you can somehow actually get behind and have some sort of resonance for you, rather than, I mean, there are those who say fake it till you make it, and maybe that works for some people. That's never worked for me. I have to you have
to buy into it. It has to be an important thought for you.
Yeah, it has to feel real in order to have any kind of like weight or magic for me. And so, the first thought that I really arrived at times of like deep sort of dark negativity was like, I'm willing to entertain the possibility that there's a bigger picture here that I can't yet see. And again, it wasn't even that it's real. It's just I'll entertain the possibility. And I will tell you that really did go a long way for me in those times of darkness and negativity, because it was just this tiny shift in vibration, but it does create a different reality.
Completely. You also tapped in, whether you were taught this or whether it just came instinctively to you. Adding the word willing is a game changer. And here's why. The unconscious is where all the power is. The conscious mind that we are aware of is completely, has no power compared to what's underneath the surface. And so you can say, I feel rich, I feel rich, I feel rich. And the demon in your unconscious is saying, well, that's a lot of horse shit. You don't feel rich. Go home. Game over. Because the unconscious will always win. It has enormity behind it. And you change the affirmation with willing. I am willing. I'm using rich because, so many people, that's what they want. They want to feel rich. I am willing to feel rich. I'm willing to feel like there's a bigger picture pulling me. I'm willing to blah, 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 blah. Well, the unconscious cannot argue with that. It has to accept that a shift is possible, because willing doesn't declare that something that it's holding is not true. It's saying that it's holding, that is, the conscious mind is holding an idea that might be true. And then the unconscious has to go away and let that seed potentially grow.
Right, exactly. And that's also why I framed it as it's a possibility.
Right.
I'm not saying this is the way it is. I'm just saying it's a possibility.
It's a possibility.
And it's exactly what you're saying. You can't argue with that. I mean, I guess you could. But, that for me was a...
Well, the conscious mind could argue with that and would, because that's what the conscious mind does. It just argues all day long. But the unconscious mind is where, all the gravitas and the power is, and had no rationality, and it will grab onto the thought that it thinks is true and create from it.
I think the final note that I want to say about the bigger picture is that it seems like that's another sort of trouble sticking point for people of just the difficulty of holding space for this possibility of there is a bigger picture here that I can't see yet. Kind of what you're speaking about, like when will it end, rather than how might this ultimately serve. The juice of this is how I show up to these difficult circumstances. And as I say this, it's almost like I can empathically feel, and I've lived this, by the way, the temptation. I can almost hear the listener who's saying, but, like, it does require faith, in the most difficult times.
Absolutely.
That's what makes it faith, and that's also what makes it difficult, is those are the times where your mind wants to default so badly to those old stories because you feel like you're getting the evidence. It's like, here it is. The external circumstances are showing me my old stories are true. I will.
And I'm in danger, and that there is a problem, and that,
I'm a fuck up. I'll be abandoned. I'll be broke. And it's like, but that's the opportunity. That's where it is most important, to have that willingness to, again, even if it's just the glimmer of a possibility of a different thought, to kind of greet it with a different vibration and to hold space for that bigger picture. Because if you don't make that choice, that is what is going to keep the story going.
Well, it's so uncomfortable to sit in. Mm-hmm. And by the way, there are things that can ease that comfort. Sex, great for that. Drugs, awesome. Alcohol, fantastic. I hear gambling works. It's not for me because I'm, sort of can't throw my money away like that. Oh my God, sitting in that discomfort, being willing to be uncomfortable without knowing how and when it was going to lift is, I think, something that everybody just has to find their willingness to do that, because it ain't comfortable.
Are you at a point, either consistently or now and then in your journey where, because you have trained yourself to sit in discomfort and to use it as an opportunity to change your vibration and create new thoughts and new realities, where you almost welcome the opportunity or view it as almost like an adrenaline high?
It's an interesting question. The language you just used, I don't identify with, but I certainly accept the idea that if a process is happening, that I'm willing to meet it. There are times where my arrogance will tell me I don't have to go through that at this time because I've done so much work. So as an example, Mars right now is in this retrograde passage. He's moving directly as we sit and do this podcast, but he's moving impossibly slow. So I've been writing a lot about old anger issues are going to come up. I've been writing about this for weeks. But I'm thinking, well, not for me, because I'm too worked out. My shit's too clean for that. And the last 2 or 3 days, and where Mars is and where Sun and Venus were when I was born are connected, so there's a reason for it being more intense for me now than it was a week ago. But these last 2-3 days, I've been having kinds of anger fantasies that I haven't lived with in 15, 20 years. Oh. And the difference is, so here's, I think, speaking into that idea of adrenaline or fun or willingness is, I'm so grateful that even though my humanity means me too, I'm just another bozo on the bus, the volume of those anger narratives is so low. And the reason they're coming up is so clear, that I'm just clearing off more layers of where rage lives in me. I'm just so grateful for the whole journey, even the awfulness of the dark night of the soul that was, 15, 18 years ago, allows me to live in that place where, I got to do the same work that everybody in my practice that I work with has to do. But the ease with it, it's like a dance now. There's just no effort to it at all because I'm not suffering. I'm also not believing any of it. I don't believe any of the thoughts that I have. In fact, what happens is I get curious. It's why have I just spent a minute and a half having this conversation with a person who's not in my car? Because I usually notice that I'm doing that after about 20 seconds and I stopped. But I used to live my life talking to people who weren't in the room because they were just people that needed to hear what I had to say to them, even if it was a fantasy.
Yeah, I know for me, there are definitely, and I'm not saying it's with every difficulty or trying circumstance, but I have noticed once I started to get evidence that, again, sort of working with my thoughts in those times where I want to default to the old negative thinking or the old stories, when I got evidence that there was such, possible transformation in that, I do find myself at times when I can sort of feel a certain kind of difficult circumstance rearing its head.
You get excited. I totally identify what you mean. Absolutely. I don't feel the same way these days, but I remember that passage of being, very excited about something coming up because it meant work was being done.
Yeah, and this is where the alchemy is.
That's right.
And so I think as I say that, it's just so interesting. I do think this is starting to happen in the collective consciousness, but certainly it can certainly stand to be cultivated more and more. But it's sort of there needs to be a conversation about changing the value system around how we regard difficulties in trying circumstances. Like you said, it's most people, and of course I myself have been this person many, many times and still am many, many times. It's we want to be comfortable. We want to get to the happy ending that we think is going to, sort of make things easier and smoother and, solve all our worries and problems. When in reality, it's just like what we're saying, these trying circumstances, these challenges, they're not inherently negative. They're actually opportunities to see what the universe is revealing to us, where it's taking us, and to work with our thoughts and our vibration and our frequency to create something different. Yeah. And I guess the last thing I'd say about it is what I love about it is the fact that someone might be discouraged or disillusioned by the fact that there's this conversation about kind of day in, day out discipline, small cumulative actions. But what I love is that is precisely where the magic is. So it is that yin yang thing of like, yes, there is magic and there's alchemy. All of that stuff is true and it's real, but your way into it, isn't through the like spiritual bypass and the grand lofty spells.
Sometimes it's sitting in the muck.
Yeah. And working with your thoughts. And so it is that polarity and that yin and yang that's sort of like the juice of life. I think what I see people having difficulty with, though, because this kind of conversation that we're having isn't necessarily center stage in the collective consciousness right now. I think a challenge for a lot of people is for example, they can come to you for an astrological reading. They can come to me for an intuitive reading. We can shed those insights. We can drop them into that place of like, greeting this with curiosity and understanding the deeper meaning. But it is true. It's like if you're not acclimated to that, and if you haven't been doing that kind of work on yourself for a long time, it's like to go back out there into the world that doesn't necessarily support that kind of process, where there's not that kind of like necessarily the context for that, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep. It's like, how do people really sort of hold a sacred process for themselves amongst not just their own muck and mire, but the muck and the mire of the world? It's hard. I have compassion for a lot of these people who are like, so what do I do now? Aside from work with me, you know what I mean? It's like, what do I do now?
The conundrum that's built into that for me is that I have a level of freedom that is, to me, extraordinary, especially based on, what I come from in terms of how I thought and how I lived my life. But I also I picked a career for the second half of my life where being in devotion and being in practice and being, in touch with that, process constantly it's my job description. Right? So I don't know how. It's like when I went to grad school and I was having trouble like doing grad school, which I was doing pretty much full time. And I had colleagues who were mothers and had jobs. Some of them were already therapists with full practice. It's like, I don't know how you do all of this discipline stuff when you have all of that to do. I get to do it full time because it's part of my profession to be spiritually fit. So I do have compassion for people how to crack the nut when some of those nuts have a really hard shell. Like the amount of work that is needed to transform a wound is Herculean. It is no small feat. And so, but I also know that the only way to do that is with the discipline in these practices. So I have both a sense of compassion about it and a sense of stern taskmaster, like, please don't come in front of me unless you have a willingness to do that, because I can't help you and there's someone right behind you who needs the help that I can have to offer.
Yeah. I mean, I think in listening to you, what really comes through for me is, regardless of the particular difficulty of your circumstance, at the end of the day, conscious choice is definitely required.
That's right.
Part of that conscious choice is the decision to believe and hold a bigger picture, and the willingness to just keep greeting your circumstances, at the very least from a place of witnessing. And I think those three things, they feel like kind of fundamental tenets of this.
In my astrology practice, I do a lot of writing, a lot of videos, teaching, and but I also have this daily column, and it's just really interesting to me in thinking about this, about how this plays out. Is the people who subscribe to my daily column are interested in knowing where they are in this experience every day, and that's the distinction between the person who wants it to sort of happen for the wishing. They want to be free of their wound and their pain for the wishing for it. So at the end of the day, you got to work for it because it's work.
I know. I feel like I'm sort of picking up on someone who might be listening. I feel the disappointment. It's like, even though I do the work, it's like I can just feel that energy in that voice. It's like, oh man, I don't want to do the work.
Hey, sweetheart, I have been there. I did not come. I'm 55 right now, and I am regularly meeting young spiritual leaders who are in their 20s. Who not only do they have their shit together, they're merged. Their thoughts are congruent with their heart's desires. That was not my story at all. I had so much to work through. And then when I thought like I had made it and hit it and my stride and I landed in my purpose, that got taken away from me in a tragic instant where I was then sent into a dark night of the soul that was as good as any loony bin, lockup. And it was brutal and wildly painful. And if I had gone to any medical professionals during that period of time and told them what I was experiencing, I would have been institutionalized. Mm-hmm. It was a pure creative illness in the way that Jung used to talk about them. I think that there are people today who are younger, who are being born into the consciousness that's available right now, that are having a good time of it. But those of us who were born a little bit earlier, we are having to push through a lot of old paradigms of thought, old ideas that land as constriction for us.
I'm having this instinct to ask you about the role of anxiety in all this. And if you're willing to share, I don't know, like if you have a relationship or have had a relationship to anxiety.
I've had a relationship with anxiety, but it's gone. So it's I once remember telling somebody when I first was experiencing the freedom from the anxiety, and my language around that was, well, I don't have anxiety. And I remember a friend of mine saying, that's like saying you don't have weather, like there's no weather where you live. And it was true that I was, I had to come back to a new relationship with anxiety where it is present. And when it does come, because I'm not living riddled with anxiety, which I think I did from maybe my adolescence until I first, was medicated for depression in my late 20s. But the experience I have now that I would say, when you ask the question, would be everything has information for you. And just as we talked about at the top of this conversation, that the information that's in your head and in your mind and in your thoughts is less valuable than the information that's in the subtleness of your experience. And anxiety is in that subtleness. Anxiety is something that's in the body that's responding to some impulse that's unconscious, some conflict that you're not aware of is causing thoughts that result in the sensation of anxiety. So there's information. Mm-hmm. And it's, I believe that you can discipline an experience of asking your unconscious self, your greater self, to reveal what that information is. I think what that looks like is you have to get quiet, and you have to be playful. You have to be imaginative. You have to be willing to have a dialogue with an imaginary aspect of self that you conjure and create. Mm. This is a very Jungian approach. It's an archetypal approach. It's the idea of using symbols to inform the irrational experience or the unknowable experience. So I'm talking about like you sitting in a chair and getting quiet and asking your anxiety, who are you? What's the information you have for me? And then just letting the imagination sort of speak to you. There's amazing things that can happen when you fine-tune and focus and lean into the anxiety, as opposed to what most people do, is they just get mad that they're anxious, which just makes them more anxious, mm-hmm. or mad or disappointed or frustrated or something, but it just loops it around even more. But you can get sort of quiet in it and lean toward it, or pull out the trusty old, paper and crayons. Draw the anxiety. Now suddenly you're having an experience of something that's human. It's in you. It's part of your embodiment. But you're not trying to have the conversation with the rational mind that isn't going to be helpful.
Right.
This is why I never became a full-time psychotherapist. Right. Because talking isn't where it's at.
I mean, the reason I brought up anxiety is just because to me it feels like one of those additional wrinkles that can make this process difficult. I mean, much in the same way of like, if you're a busy single mother with 3 jobs, anxiety to me just adds this sort of physiological sort of extra layer on top of like navigating. And I think it's something almost everyone is dealing with in some shape, form, or fashion. But I think you spoke to it really beautifully. This notion of therapy, I was just thinking about that this morning. It's like therapy to me, it addresses sort of an initial layer.
Oh my God, that's exactly how I put it. It's like, you need some therapy or we can't go any deeper. You do have to know the roadmap of you. You do have to know what the daddy wound was and what the mommy wound was and how the sibling unit sort of fucked you up too. You gotta know that. That arena is to map it. It's the whiteboard where you draw the diagram of your neuroses, and then start getting into embodiment work, get into breath work, get out the tennis racket and pound the pillow, draw the archetypes that live inside you, do the irrational work. That's where the healing is.
Because we are these creative beings.
That's right. That's right. So like if I have a client who comes in and she's talking about having a suffering experience and I feel the instinct, I will go to the cabinet and I will pull out my art supplies and I'll say, draw it. And then she'll draw it. And then suddenly we'll be having a deep and profound conversation about what's going on or a past event or something that was triggered by the act of drawing it. Or we could spend an additional 3 sessions talking about her history and her anxiety and her family relationships. And then in the 3rd session, we might get to the same place that we got in 40 minutes with the drawing.
I think most people sort of have a general sense of like what astrology is, but I am curious, like if I were just to ask you kind of like the simplest definition of astrology, working definition of astrology, what would you say?
Well, I have to start with what astrology isn't.
Okay.
Because what almost everybody who's listening to this podcast thinks astrology is, it probably isn't. Most people associate astrology with the sun sign that they were born under and the sun sign of everyone they've ever dated. Like, oh, I'll mention something about Mars is in Capricorn. Oh, Capricorns, they're this or they are that. In astrology, there are no Capricorns. Capricorn is an archetype. And you might have your sun in Capricorn, but that's just one tiny element of what astrology has to offer in terms of describing the blueprint of who you are. It just happens to be, because the sun is the center of our solar system, then archetypally in a natal chart, the sun is the center of you. It is the integrating hub through which all of the shifts and changes that you might go through in a life that are described by the other planet placements in astrology are being integrated and centered in you. So if you pick up a list of the archetypal characteristics of any sign, and it happens to be the sign that your sun is in, of course you're going to identify with all of those qualities, or most of them, because the central integrating part of you is the planet, or in this case the sun, that these aspects are being attributed to. So we all run around thinking, oh, I know astrology because I'm a Leo and I dated 3 Pisces and that was very difficult. But that's not astrology. So what astrology is, and so leaning then into a working definition of what astrology is astrology is the description of the energy that shifts and changes moment by moment. Everything that we experience is energy. We are energy. Life is energy. And the movement of the planets is an energy that is not separate from our movement through life. It is connected. People assume that it's not because of some rationality that they add in, that, oh, the planet's so far away, how could it be impacting me or causing things to happen? Except it's not causing things to happen. Astrology isn't about the planets cause stuff. The planets reflect stuff. Everything is happening simultaneously. So your creation of your life is simultaneous to the solar system unfolding. And if you think that you are separate from that, go ahead, but you're mistaken. Right? You don't have to believe in astrology, but you can't refute, even though you might want to refute it, that we are connected to everything. Certainly, quantum physics tells us that we are connected to everything. And so if everything is moving and we're connected to everything, then we are moving. And if that out there is moving in this way, then this in here, I'm touching my body now, is moving in the same way. Quantum physics tells us that. We're all connected, but we're not connected separately. That's an oxymoron. So we are connected energetically to every movement that happens. I know this from moments when I lived with a basset hound for 9 years. And so when I would meditate in tone and make sound, he would come in the room and tone with me. And then I could feel the way his tone and my tone were responding. I know that I can be sitting in meditation and feel this incredible shift and change in my energetic experience. And 30 seconds later, a helicopter flies over. I can feel the helicopter before the helicopter alerts my ears that it's nearby. Because we're all energy and we're all connected. And that connection doesn't stop at the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what I wrote as I was kind of feeling into this interview this morning, what I wrote down in my notebook was such a deep connection to the universe.
Yes,
I mean, because that's really what we're talking about, right? We're talking about this connection to the cosmos, to the planets, to the stars, which to me, I mean, when I say it, it just fills my whole body with...
Right, because it's a powerful thing. The thing about astrology is astrology describes the connection. People think that, oh, I want to get connected to the universe, or I want to get connected to the earth. Well, that's ludicrous. You're already connected. You can't not be connected. By using astrology as a tool, it triggers the mind's acceptance of that. If I tell somebody about a cycle ending and the date that something happened fits exactly in, which is a daily experience for me, right? Where people are having aha moments about energies described by astrology and events that were completely synchronistic and happening simultaneously. That aha I can experience as kind of like a dropping off of the resistance to the idea that when we say we're all connected and that all energy is one, that's real. And astrology is just our best describer of it.
Right. It's an accessible daily tool, to navigate that oneness, which otherwise often feels like very ethereal and out of reach, and I have to go drink ayahuasca to touch it.
Touch it. Yeah.
When in reality, it's right here.
It's right here.
So there's this element of like we're filtering the information through kind of our human consciousness, right?
Yes.
But if humans didn't exist, if we still lived in a time of like dinosaurs or even just, single cell amoebas, the same forces would be at work. And so, I want to speak to how we ascribe values and emotional currency, I guess if that's the right term, to these forces. And yet that can't be the inherent nature of it because it's conditional on our human consciousness, right? I know I'm
having an experience. Like the channeling part of me is lit up, and then the rational part of me is like, what? I can't keep up. But go ahead. Is there a question?
I'm feeling into the question.
Yeah.
I guess, does astrology still exist if human beings aren't here to ascribe that value to it?
Let's just be real simple. If there were no humans being conscious of who they were, at night it would still be night, and day would still be day. The earth would be spinning, and there would be a difference that the earth would experience on its cool side and its warm side. Mm-hmm. Now, humans come along and say, look at this. I'm going to call this day and this night. But the earth is, already there. She's been experiencing this since her formation. So, I think our language and our perceptions are paltry to describe the mystery of the universe. But we do our best. It's the only thing that we have. So one of the fundamental things about astrology and its trueness is that it is true. And that we use our language to do our best to bring the information and wisdom that's built into it into consciousness. But it's still a paltry thing to attempt to speak the mind of the universe.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me because it's almost like, let's say there were, and I'm sure there probably is, a language amongst the single cell amoebas. It's like they'd have their own way of filtering the same information.
Absolutely. And I would say they would have the same up and downness of cycles. I don't know what it would feel like in their community, but I would die for the truth that I believe to be true, that yes, single-celled organisms are experiencing Uranus's passage through Taurus differently than when he was in Aries for 8 years.
Yeah, so I love this. I mean, I love this. Like, for me, this is so exciting. Like, this idea, and I've never actually framed it for myself this way, that astrology really is a gateway to experiencing the oneness of the cosmos, the universe, source energy, day in, day out.
When we used to live connected to mythology, we had, the human race, had these beautiful mythic stories through which, considering them, we had this relationship with the mystery. Science and rationality has interrupted that. And I think part of what we're looking to do in this new world that we're creating is to come back to some kind of relationship with the mystery.
Yes.
So for me particularly, the gateway is by using astrology to have people be in relationship with the mysterious or the unknowable or the what is not visible or rational with the mind. There, two things happen. One is, they're having a relationship with the mystery, and that's beautiful.
Right.
That is just a beautiful thing to experience as a human being, is to be in relationship with the mystery. Some people do that by looking up and seeing an extraordinary sunset, and suddenly they don't know why they feel so good. They think it's the sunset. Well, it is, but what's happening there in that humanistic experience of looking at the sunset is you're suddenly in relationship with the divine, with the mystery. That sunset is so much bigger than you, and in that moment of joining with that, there's a beautiful thing that happens. And I'm sure that we could probably stick some people in a CAT scan or others and see their brains exploding with some sort of neurological response to the beauty of it. So God works through the chemicals in our brains, right? And so astrology offers that experience, but it also offers a daily shifting, readable expectation of what the energy is going to feel like in a particular day, which gets context. I can't tell you how many emails I get on a regular basis. Oh my God, thank you so much. I'm paraphrasing. They don't use this word, but I'll use it. Thank you for the context that I suddenly didn't feel insane anymore because I heard from you that there's this energy that astrology describes that, and then everybody in their world is feeling the same chaos. And so they recognize that. And I recognize that.
And I'll just say, since I've started following you and your work, I have used that word, context. And, it's funny because it brings me back to my days as a script consultant. I would always teach about context. Right. The context of a story is so hugely important because it's the container, that sort of incubates the life of the story. And it always did feel like a spiritual principle to me. And it was the same thing with your work where, I am someone, for better or for worse, who is extremely sensitive to the astrological comings and goings.
Absolutely, me too.
And so, for me, I would just go through these periods of just what the fuck's going on? I feel horrible. And then, to get the reflection from you of this is what's happening and this is how it's hitting your chart, it's like there is suddenly context.
That's right.
And it changes everything. And this to me just kind of circles back to the first half of this conversation where it's like thinking about how to greet difficult circumstances or difficult phases of life when you know that connection to the universal mystery and to the cosmos. It's like that is another version of the bigger picture. And it's almost like that in and of itself can be a relief. That in and of itself can be a new reality of there is some sort of deeper meaning here. There's connection to source. There's connection to universe. It's not just random meaningless malaise. I have to imagine that for a lot of people, just even knowing that could provide that difference in vibration that could really change things for them.
There's an adage that goes, this too will pass. And it's one of the things that the context of astrology offers people, is there's a sense of, now again, I get annoyed sometimes when the question is, well, when is this going to pass? But there is actually tools with astrology that will say, this will pass on the 12th of March. And I get emails all the time. You said it would pass on the 12th of March, and sure enough, on March 13th, I felt differently. One of the challenges with that is that people, I want to encourage the notion of the surrender that can happen when someone knows that something's going to pass. But I also don't want to discourage them from staying in the more difficult, more uncomfortable cycle and using it toward your advantage so that it does its work. If we're in one of those lower challenging cycles, we're being cleaned out somehow. There's surgery happening. We don't want to miss that.
And I have a way to inspire them to stay with the discomfort as you're talking. What comes to me though is look, and this is totally bribery. I feel like I'm the parent. It's well, if you want the candy bar to the kid.
But it's true. Absolutely. It's absolutely true. If you want the freedom, if you want the happiness and contentment that's possible, if you want the joy, joy that is your birthright to experience, you do have to stay in the discomfort long enough to do the work.
And, well, I was actually going to go the flip side of it, which is like you can bypass the discomfort and be fixated on April 12th, but then you are going to miss some deeper excavation. And then I got bad news for you. Somewhere down the line,
you're going to have to do it again.
Yeah, you're going to have to circle around that same block.
Well, like the thing that I'm in right now is old material, this Mars experience that I'm having, where I'm having anger fantasies that just feel like they're just decades old of, gripping me. If I hadn't done all that work, this moment would be wildly uncomfortable because it wouldn't be a dim noise of past recognition that these judgments, these criticisms, these darker feelings still live within me. I would be battling them because we battle until we're done, right? Fortunately, I've done my battling, right? But I'm also human and alive, which means I'm never going to be free of my humanity or my personality. Right. So there's always more to do.
And I think the other thing that comes up for me around this is just the lack of attention and priority and emphasis given to this notion of context in our world. And I think, I was sort of speaking this earlier, like when I have clients who are like, okay, so what do I do now? And it's like, that's always the compassion I have for them. It's like, I feel like for myself, I'm constantly creating my own context. You know what I mean? Like I create my own, okay, well, why don't I see this as a 3 to 4 month process? Like, let me give it a title. Let me give it a name. Let me create that's what I do for my clients who I work with on an ongoing basis. It's like, yeah, sign up to work with me for 4 to 6 months. It's let's create a container and context, because it's like otherwise we live in this amorphous world that doesn't create the containers to hold the space for the work.
That's right.
And then we all just kind of feel like, again, what the F's going on here? How do I navigate this on my own? There's no context for this.
One of the things that comes up so often with clients of mine is they are up to something, right? They want to create something in their lives, whether it be a project or a career change or something, right? And there's the self-criticism that they're pummeling their experience with because it's not happening fast enough for them to be comfortable that the process that they're in is effective, right? They want results, and they don't know why they're not getting them. And very often what the astrology will tell me is, of course, that the person who's in kind of non-movement and push-pull frustration, there's always going to be an astrological cycle that reflects it. And so the context that I offer them, and I've said this many, many times, or a version of this, I will tell them, this is what to expect from this moment, that this is the moment not to be moving forward. This is the moment to be having a kind of push-pull struggle. Mm-hmm. This is the moment that something is germinating behind the scenes, and your rational approach to it is going to make you a little crazy. Now, in 9 months, when this cycle's over, we can't be having the same conversation. So if you come back to me a year from now, and you're still struggling to move through being creative and expressive, now we're going to have a conversation about resistance. That's the context piece that often people see their non-movement and judge it and say, oh, I'm failing, when the fact is they're not failing. They're just in a germinating state when they want to be in a harvest moment.
Yeah, and it makes me so angry because I just feel like there is kind of a cultural conversation we need to have about process as opposed to product result, but it's everywhere.
I know it's everywhere. And I don't think we can going to shift that. But we do have to be willing to teach and able to teach people how to disengage from that enough to do the work.
Well, I think and I hate using this language because it just feels so cliche and everyone's talking about it, but whatever. If it is true, and I do believe it is actually, that we are entering sort of a new shift in consciousness. I do feel like part of that huge shift in consciousness is that, and I called it a cultural value, which I think in some way applies like America, and I actually meant like a global cultural, like a human value around teaching. Something needs to be shifted. This is what we need to teach in our schools and how we need to raise our kids and ourselves. It's like process, because that's all there is. That is truly the journey of life. We are in one unknown, ongoing process. So the fact that we don't really give, as a global society, conscious time and attention to teaching people, this is how you engage with process in a sane, rooted, grounded way, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot. Yeah. So I guess let me ask you this. we started speaking to it in terms of the person who might, for example, hear April 12th and make the choice to bypass their issues rather than to sit in the discomfort. And in that place is choice, right? And so I'm always, with astrology, I'm so drawn to this tension. I mean, I'm calling it a tension. Maybe it's not a tension, but this tension between free will and destiny, what's in the chart versus what's not in the chart. So let me come back to the person who's like focused on April 25th. So as the date,
right, then it's all gonna sort of unfold.
End, yeah. So, you know, I mean, they have a choice at that point, right? About whether to sit in the discomfort,
right,
change their reality, let go of things, undertake transformation that let's say that's what their soul came here to do, or to just stay focused on April 25th. Oh my God, I'll be more comfortable. Okay, I got there and I didn't really do my work. So you've got like two sort of possible versions there. Does the person who stays focused on the outcome, doesn't sort of greet this as an opportunity to go inward, it's almost like, what does that mean for the rest of their lives? Like, how does that reverberate? If there truly are no mistakes, how is that not a mistake? You know, it's like, these are the questions that I find so fascinating.
I feel inspired to speak into chaos for a moment. Okay? I'm not really sure why, so let's see if it relates. So, one of the things that makes me, sort of jazzes me up about perceiving the world and speaking about it is that I consider myself half scientist, half mystic. It's very 50-50. It's not one or the other. It's not 51%, 49%. It's very 50-50. I have to satisfy both sides. Well, the world is like that. The universe is also 50-50, a kind of 50-50. One side is this perfect divine unfolding plan that has a kind of narrative in and of itself, and it's random and chaotic. Fully 50% random and chaos. And spiritual teachers don't like to talk about the randomness and the chaos because it's antithetical to the idea of, no, you create your life. Oh, no, you create your life with your thoughts. Oh, no, you must learn how to think properly so that you can create the life of magnificence. And if you don't have a life of magnificence, it's your fault because you're not thinking properly, because you're not using the laws of manifestation and attraction properly. But there's also this fully present 50% of the experience is random and chaotic. Now, you can't work with random and chaos. There's no discipline in random and chaos. There's no intuiting, what random and chaos, has to offer. There's just random and chaos. I think one of the context pieces now and then has to be, oh, right, not everything is I'm creating my life with my thoughts, and if my life isn't good enough, it must mean I'm failing. Sometimes we're also just bumping up against randomness and chaos, and we have to contend with that. Stuff happens. I work with a lot of people who have cancer. And this is a really interesting dynamic that comes up in a lot of these conversations is the spiritual perspective that you create your life with your thoughts would translate. I gave myself cancer with my bad thoughts. Now, is that true? I don't know. I know that it's an interesting conversation to have, but I also know that cancer just happens, right? So which is it? At the end of the day, I don't think any of us can know, and I wouldn't trust anybody who stands in, oh, I know, absolutely, because it's a mystery. So astrology, for me, bridges those two concepts. There is a rational, unfolding, divine order to the universe that astrology describes in the language of geometry. The planets ding, and they hit, and they make shapes, and then they move on. They splash out all across the cosmos and gather up in the cosmos in a kind of every year or two. They just do this splash and gather, and you can predict it and know it, and that's marvelous. But we live in a universe that is chaotic and random with exploding, stars and black holes. We just don't see it. But the greater part of our universe is random, chaotic, and terrifying. So astrology is measuring that, even if we can't use language to describe it. It's still 360-degree description of the universe, which just includes this sort of magnificent chaos that we have to contend with. Mm-hmm. I feel like we might have just jumped a little bit off a cliff into the hooey land, but nonetheless, the chaos is important to keep in mind.
Well, no, actually, what I was going to say quite simply is I actually really sort of love and respect your willingness to stand in the chaos. It also reminds me of, one thing, because I have known you for a while, one thing I've observed in you at least from the outside, is just everything that we're talking about. Such a real willingness to be in your own process at your own pace. I've known some of your story, and you talked about certain professional disappointments and things that fell through, and I've really sort of seen you from afar, like build and build and build something, and I can feel your trust in the pace, and I can feel, at least bigger picture level, a sort of unhurriedness to it, which I similarly respect. I don't know why I'm pairing these two things together. To me, they feel connected. Like the one that is comfortable with the chaos and the randomness and sort of will name it, and the one who's also really been willing to stand in, this is my process. This didn't look like what I thought it was going to look like. Slow and steady is winning me the race.
Where they meet is that by honoring the divine pace, you sometimes have to stand still while the chaos is pummeling you with discomfort. What that looks like in practical application is that when I first had this television show, you hinted at, that went away very fast, and I had this idea that the visibility that I briefly enjoyed was going to lead to the career that I have now. So this is back in around 2003, and suddenly I had a workshop here and a conference in New York City on spiritual. I'm sitting on a panel, blah, blah, blah. One by one, they were all canceled. Every single one of them. My first 2 years after that television show, not a single workshop happened, except one that I did in my little guest house in Hollywood. The universe was saying no, no, no. Now cut to later, as I started to build and develop and amp up, I can't tell you how many people came to me over the years. And they'd see my stuff, right? And they'd be like, oh, you should do this and you should do that. And I would always try to be very polite, as inside I was just gripping my guts, trying to say, please don't project your perceptions of what I should do onto me. And then I would sort of say, well, not now, or I'm not quite ready for that, or I'm moving slowly towards that. The response would often be, oh, you don't know how good you are. It's like, oh, sweetheart, you don't know me at all. If you think I don't know how good I am because I am my biggest fan, that is not a challenge. I come through the bridge of narcissism. There's no doubt about my talent and my efficacy. But there is this demand to meet the pace as the pace meets me.
Right.
Now, I can tell you, I could look at the arc of the last 15 years and the astrological transits of these last few years when my expansion has been accelerated, and I can point to the picture. Now, I didn't sit back 12 years ago and look forward and say, oh, we can't wait till 2018 because that's going to be a big year. I didn't do that. But now that we've gotten there, I can look back and say, well, of course it didn't happen here or here or here. It happened when this cycle started. And it makes complete sense. That's another value of astrology giving context. And that context and living in that context, having faith in it, is what allows me to move at a slow pace. I don't judge at all the pace. Part of that is trusting my vision. I know why I'm here. I know what I'm here to do. And I'm already doing it, which means if it never gets any bigger or greater than it is right now, I've met my dharma. I've lived my life purpose. If I got killed by a truck outside today, I could go to heaven happy.
In hearing you speak, what sort of comes up for me, I can sort of feel that voice, whether this is an aspect of me or it's like the listener out there who's listening, or both. It's just that willingness to surrender to the dharma. I mean, in hearing you speak it feels so powerful. And just that childish tantrum that's like, but wait, I want what I want when I want it, right. And I want my vision of it. And yet knowing, as I say it, all the misery that creates.
So much misery. And when we get to a place where we are in acceptance of what is and we're not arguing with reality, that's where contentment is. That's where joy is. Surrendering to what is doesn't mean a relinquishing of what might be. I think that's one of the reasons why people are reticent to let go of their attachments to the form that they want. They think that if they don't have that attachment to form, that somehow life isn't going to give them yummy stuff.
Which in a way, it's almost like that's the lower self, because if they are willing to meet their divine pace, then that often is the key to, fulfilling what life actually wants to bring to you. And it's that voice that's saying, no, if you do that, you're not going to get what you want. actually doesn't want you to get
That's right.
what you
That's
want.
right. I mean, that was the story of sort of landing on the television, box as a dream expert and thinking this is what I was born to. And that was the real belief at that moment. And the drop, when 3 months after the show was, premiered, that it just went away one weekend. It was like one Friday it was on and then it was off, and it was a shock to my sense of life purpose. And the dark night of the soul that followed was brutal. I wouldn't change it for anything. I wouldn't give it up for anything. Because the authenticity that it brought me is worth gold.
Right. And so in a way, I mean, this is perfect because you're circling it back around to the beginning. And I know we've been talking for a while, so maybe we'll use this as an opportunity to wrap up. But you're modeling exactly what we're talking about, which is, circumstances brought you something that your mind, your ego did not want.
That's right.
And you had a choice of how you greeted it. And you made that choice. And you honored your divine timing. And now you do see sort of the meaning and the perfection and the divine wisdom of it all, even amidst, the part that you reserve for chaos. And here you are.
And both of us have found ways to teach, help, and inspire others to do some version of the same. Mm-hmm. And I trust that the people who there's a wonderful New Yorker cartoon that I will never, ever, ever forget. It's a therapist and a client in a session, and they each have a thought bubble. And the patient's thought bubble is, I hope this therapist can heal what I have. And the thought bubble above the therapist is, I hope this patient has what I can heal. And astrology is the gateway for me. I can't help you have a greater experience of the mystery of the divine, of a spiritual practice, of a process towards heart-centered living, unless you're willing to use the language of astrology. It doesn't mean that astrology is the only way. It is the best use of me. So if someone is responding to me as an inspiration or me as a teacher, then astrology is probably going to help you utilize what I bring and have to offer, the full efficacy of what's available for that. And so once I leaned into that, that's when life started to sort of open up, because I wasn't resisting being an astrologer in the world. And my rationality, everything about my background and my scientific upbringing says you can't do that. But nonetheless, once I did, and once I surrendered to that, everything opened up.
Yeah, and I guess as a final note, the word context comes in just on the level of in this conversation even, we're talking about the alignment of the macro to the micro, because the astrology brings in the universe and the cosmos and source, and then bringing that all the way down to the individual and those daily actions and those daily practices and how you sort of work with the tangible, sort of interface of the universe that's coming to you, by going to Trader Joe's. Like you said, it's people don't have to use astrology. There's choice of your vehicle. But one thing that I do love about astrology from this conversation is the fact that it really does kind of align everything
in the moment that it's occurring.
Right.
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, the macro to the micro. All right. Well, this has been a very illuminating, provocative conversation. Is there any last, anything you would want to say just to kind of anyone listening from an astrological perspective of what you think they need to hear, understand? I mean, not quickly.
The last thing I would say is something we've already said. When in doubt, put a hand on your heart, a hand on your belly, take a deep breath, and for that moment that you're taking that breath, know that you can live inside that comfort, serenity, and surrender.
Let me plug a few of your things. I've already mentioned your daily astro alert. So your website's
michaellennox.com. That is the easiest way to get directly in touch with me, is michaellennox.com. That's where you can book appointment sessions and learn about my course, Astrology 101, where I teach people how to read their natal charts. Facebook is definitely the place to check in with what I have to offer on a regular basis. So Michael Lennox is a professional page, is available to follow and like, and I'm on there constantly with just more and more and more information and helpful navigating tool.
Okay, guys, I'm jumping in here, interrupting the recording to make sure you guys have updated information for Michael. So yes, his website still stands, michaellennox.com. As far as social media goes, you should definitely follow him on Instagram at Dr. Lennox Dreams. Also on TikTok, Dr. Michael Lennox. And he actually does 1 minute quick hit astrological updates every morning. It's called Red Robe Astrology. So follow him on both those any of those platforms. He's also on Facebook as well. And you can get your kind of 1 minute hit every morning to kind of get a sense of what the day might bring. And in other news, more importantly, Dr. Michael Lennox has also released his own podcast. And his podcast is called Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. And it alternates between really going into detail around what's going on in the astrological forecast of the world. So again, hearkening back to this conversation, if you're looking for that kind of cosmic astrological context, checking out his podcast is a great way to go. And then he also has people come on and relay their dreams, and he interprets their dreams on the podcast. So again, it's sort of a great way to just sort of check out the archetypal world of the subconscious and the unconscious. It's very inspiring and provocative in terms of reflecting on your own inner landscape. And he's always looking for more people to bring their dreams to the pod. So if you check it out and maybe want him to interpret one of your dreams, you can always contact him there. Okay, guys, thanks for being with me as always, and I will see you next time.